So basically, before we begin, I will preface to say that most of the information that comes from this workshop comes out of this book. Okay, this book is by Dr. James Chestnut, and it's called The Wellness Prevention Paradigm. And most of the information I learned came from his first module seminar I went to. So a lot of this stuff, it's not stuff that I had to come up with, but I get to share with you and other individuals on a daily basis. So I hope you enjoy the workshop. It certainly brings a lot of joy to me bringing it to you. The first place we're going to start with is really telling you, well, you're not that much difference from a dog. And I know that's a bit funny to say, but basically, if you think about it, when we see families at the dinner table, one of the things you quite often hear is, no honey, those potato chips aren't for the dog, they're for you. Okay? Or, honey, don't feed that chocolate to the dog because that's for you. Because the chocolate will kill the dog. Okay? But we don't believe that consequence is the same for us. When we eat chocolate, we don't think we're going to die. And you know what? At that instant, you certainly won't. But long-term eating of chocolate and potato chips and these foods that aren't suitable for dogs, okay, are going to hurt you too. The second thing is basically exercise habits. We often say, oh, I need to take the dog for a walk. But the truth is, why do we walk the dog? Because the dog needs its exercise. Without exercise, we know they get obese and they get restless and they become irritable and become a pain in the butt to deal with. Okay. Yes, the dog also needs to do its business, but essentially, it's so the dog doesn't get restless and destroy your house. The truth though is we take the dogs for walks, but we don't exercise ourselves. We let the dog actually walk us when we go for a walk. It's like, let's get chased by the dog. The scary thing is essentially, the consequences for these animals are the same for us. The problem is we haven't really put enough thought into it, what their consequences are. We haven't put enough emotional attachment to those consequences. We don't believe those consequences are really that serious. Because if we talk about that chocolate, if I said, here's a bar of chocolate, you'd probably go, oh, thank you. But if we said, now this bar of chocolate's been laced with arsenic, you wouldn't want that bar of chocolate at all, because instantly your perspective on that bar of chocolate's gone up to, no, this will kill me. But the truth is, every bit of chocolate essentially is no different. The poor choices that you make will make a big deal in your overall health. A poor choice basically means poor health, or certainly an increased risk. Every choice you make has an effect on the body. It's a cause and reaction. You cannot escape it. What's bad for the animal kingdom is essentially bad for you too. There are certain foods that are designed to be eaten by our bodies, and there are certain foods that we need to avoid. And we need to make sure that every time we make a choice, as we'll come to know it as, apples and donuts. Okay? When we're choosing between apples and donuts, we know inherently that apples are better for us than donuts. Yet too often we don't choose the apple, because for us it's just a little bit of hip fat, or it's a little bit of bump fat. It has nothing to do with that long term. It actually will kill us, and it's killing our nation. Let's move on. We're going to give you this great story that I got taught, and that's called the Great Lakes. And the Great Lakes, I believe, are certainly in Canada, and there was a certain scenario where a lot of fish were washing up onto the shore sick and dying. And basically, the fish were sick and dying because there were a lot of factories that started dumping their chemicals into these waters. And the fish were basically dying. But the birds then went, hoo-hoo, I don't have to fish. And they started to eat the fish on the side. And those birds were basically getting poor egg shells. Okay, the eggs were just very brittle, so they weren't reproducing very well. They got very sick and got cancers and tumors. Now, medicine would come along and say, well, actually the problem is the fish. We've got to save the fish and heal them, and so that the birds don't get sick. But that's a little bit silly, because reality says that the factory's got to stop dumping the chemicals. See, if a biologist went to any animal and said, oh, well, the genes must have made them produce this sickness, when we know it is their environment, we'd go, you're silly, man. But this is happening on a daily basis, and I'm going to talk to you how that's happening. The second thing is the solution here is to drop tons of drugs and chemo in the water so the fish get better. You go, got to change the environment. And so the environment I'm going to show you tonight is probably the key critical component into your overall health. And by changing simple things in your environment, the chance of you dying from a health or lifestyle related disease is going to be so much lower. And the whole premise that you get born healthy, die, in your 80s because your body's given up, will be totally squashed tonight. And I will teach you that, no, the body at 0, yes, may be healthy, but it should be getting stronger and stronger year in, year out. What animal do you know of today that is dying from sickness? Maybe our house pets, okay, because they're on drugs and surgeries. But if we look at the dog's lifestyle or the cat's lifestyle, they're living our lifestyle. We're feeding them the rubbish. If you go to the jungle in Africa, do you see any animal dying of high blood pressure? Any animal dying of cancer? No. And if they do happen, so be it. But majority of them dying old and peacefully. And we want to see this happen with us too. We should be dying because we're really, really old. And because our body has given us so many wonderful years. The environment's been compromised. We need to change it. The truth is, though, to tell someone they're responsible for their own death is very hard. Because death is a human tragedy. We don't like it. We don't like to talk about it. We don't even really want to hear it. We really don't find death comfortable. We really like to push it aside. But the reality is each person has a say into how healthy or unhealthy a person is. So, we're going to talk about this thing called the plant analogy. Dr. James came up with this and I absolutely love it. The plant analogy will tell us, well, what is flawed with the way medical research is done today. Because understand, your government is making decisions based on these the researchers that are providing the government with this evidence, right? And so what you're getting marketed, what you're getting presented to in your health budget every year is literally governed by what these scientists find in their research. The first thing that you need to know about science or research is that they ask a question. And the question is really to find out whether or not something is better than something else. And they call it the null hypothesis. So what that would mean is something better than not doing it at all? So in this case, with the case of plants, we would ask a hypothetical question that real water is more important to a dying plant than fake water. And that would seem a logical question to ask. If I've got a dying plant, we all know it probably needs some water, so do we give it real water? And one group will give fake water. And after 6 weeks, if both plants are still dying, in the science world, that would mean that real water is no better than fake water. Even though how silly that sounds. Because we all know inherently that plant would be better off with water. So science has then developed, just to make sure that there's no bias and to making sure that everything is really accurate, they've designed something called a randomized double-blind control trial. Sounds really fancy, but what that is basically, if the plant is the test subject, just to make sure that me, the researcher, is not going to, skew the results, what we do is I will get you, Julie, to administer the drug, but I would make sure that Joseph gives you the pill, so that you administering the drug don't know what you're giving, and Joseph doesn't know which test subject is getting what, and I don't know actually anything. Okay? And that's a double blind essentially. And then to randomize it, we'll select so many people out of a category and shove them in group A, and the people that roughly are the same, we'll shove them in category B. That's randomized control trial. So what would happen then is, if water didn't solve the solution of the dying plant, what would else be needed? Julie, what do you think would be needed to help this dying plant if water didn't help? Okay. Nutrients. Okay, nutrients. So, all right, so the study would then look like this. We'd give one plant real water and real nutrients, one plant real water, fake nutrients, one plant fake water, real nutrients, and one plant fake. Okay? Now, we run the study for 6 weeks or 12 weeks. That's a standard sort of trial period. And at the end of the study, we find that the plants are both still dying. Now, in the research world, the question says, real, is it better than fake? Or actually, is fake any better than real? And in both, we have to conclude that no, it isn't, because the plant's still dying, because that's a question. Is what we're going to give the plant going to stop it wilting? And the answer is no. So in the medical world, they would have to assume then that real water and real nutrients is no good for that plant. And anyone who says that they should have water and nutrients is an absolute quack, because the research doesn't support it. Does that sound silly to you? You could take it on and on and on. You could even then say, okay, well, it needs sunlight. So you get real, and eventually get a fake, and ask the question. And if the plant's still dying, they would still have to say that none are better for the plant. See, the truth is, if a factory down the road is dumping billions of chemicals in the water, you're still going to have a dying plant. Medicine doesn't take into account the environment. They don't take into account the function of a human body. Because as you will learn, they would determine a subject that's going to be tested to be healthy if there's no medical diagnosis. But medical diagnosis doesn't mean the person is 100% function. And that's a scary thought. Because these guys are doing our research and telling us what's right and what's wrong, and telling you what you can do and what you can't do, and what people should get and not get. And that's a real scary thing, because it means that people at the moment are being misinformed on research that is really, really bad. It's all about the question. We need to start looking at function. So let's talk about function. What is function? Well, we've got this fancy word called homeostasis. Homeostasis is basically a simple or a scientific term for balance and harmony within each cell, providing 10 out of 10 function. So that every cell is getting what it needs to survive, and being able to self-regulate to stay in harmony with all the cells around each other. Does that make sense? So instead of homeostasis, we'll really just use balance and harmony from now on. Death then is pretty obvious, is the opposite from 10 out of 10 function. It's 0 out of 10. Does that make sense? Sickness, therefore, by definition, is a lack of harmony or less than 10 out of 10 function. It doesn't say anything about how much pain you're in. It doesn't say anything about how much high blood pressure you have. It doesn't say anything about high cholesterol. It just says less than 10 out of 10 function. That is sickness. The question then is, do you think your cell function occurs by random chance? Do you think every cell of your body randomly chooses how it operates right now? Joseph, what do you think?
Yes, it is. As far as going through the genetics and all that.
We'll talk about genetics in a sec,
yeah.
But do you think the cells, your heart cells right now, are they operating randomly, or are they operating under a set govern?
They've all got a job.
They've all got a job.
They've all got a job, and your whole body provides the input for
Exactly
that.
right. It's not random at all.
No.
Okay? It's a set function, it's a set task. Do you think you are genetically programmed for sickness or balance and harmony and 10 out of 10 function?
Yes.
You are. You're not designed to sick and die. It's just not natural. Every time an injury happens, like a scar or a cut, the body will try and heal it. Even on death's door, the body will try and survive. It is a surviving machine. That's all it's designed to do, survive. What animal in the planet do you know that is just gets born and just decays instantly? No, they're all trying to survive and thrive. That's what survival of the fittest is, right? We're trying to survive and live long and live happy. As long as something doesn't come along and eat us, okay, we should be living a long, happy life. So let's talk about genetics a little bit then, okay?